So today's a really important day. You've got the second reading of your private member's bill on Down syndrome. Talk to us about what the bill is all about.
Well, the impetus of the bill was really the fact that when I was born, your life expectancy with Down syndrome was 13 years. By the time I was a junior doctor, it was 30. Now it's 58. In other words, this is the first generation of people with Down syndrome who will outlive their parents. And that provides an urgency to do something about it, because if we don't act, there will be perfectly predictable human tragedies that will occur. It's a question of independence and dignity for those with Down syndrome, but it's also a question of the worry that parents have, what will happen when I'm not there. So we have to deal with the care issue, the long-term care issue, but we also need to deal with the other issues that people with Down syndrome face, challenges around education and special needs, and the complex medical needs. So it's about dealing with all of them, making sure that the best practice across the country is available to everybody.
And why is this issue so important to you? You mentioned that when you were born, life expectancy for Down syndrome people was 13 years. Did you have any friends with Down syndrome when you were younger? Was there some personal contact there that made this important to you?
Yes, when I was growing up, the boy next door, Drew Houston, had Down syndrome. But obviously, in my time as a doctor, I dealt with a lot of cases, and all MPs deal with the complexities of the cases of people with Down syndrome and the pressures on their families. And it's obvious sometimes it's not just that they have to deal with one, but several departments, which can make life very challenging. And I think one of the reasons that we've got so much support today from across the House is that MPs have seen for themselves the problem. So all of us come at it from personal and professional and political directions.
And is there a kind of recognised pathway? Obviously each child is different in terms of the educational process, but do parents generally still face a real battle to get their children into the right educational settings? Well,
they can, and it will vary depending on where they live. There's of course an amazing spectrum intellectually in people with Down syndrome. There are a lot of wrong preconceptions about the capabilities of people with Down syndrome. So it's getting the appropriate type of care. It's also recognising they have identifiable problems with identifiable solutions, and where the medical care tends to be very good across the whole country, which has, of course, contributed to the improvement in life expectancy, particularly things like neonatal care and paediatric cardiac surgery. As well as the treatment of leukemia, which is much more common in people with Down syndrome. All these things have produced an increased life expectancy, but they have produced also their own problems. So it's a question of trying to get the balance right.
And it's a huge anxiety for parents of children who have Down syndrome, this whole issue of what happens to them after I, as a parent, have gone. Is that the number one anxiety for parents in that situation as their children grow up?
I think it is increasingly a source of anxiety. We know in some parts of the country where we've got the best type of care, where we have assisted living with minimal intervention, that people with Down syndrome can be independent and can have their dignity that we would take for granted. In some parts of the country, it's not so good. We need not only to get these things in place, but to get them in place in time, so that if a parent dies, someone's life will not be upended. And getting them into the appropriate type of care is key. It's also key to avoiding the horrors of inappropriate care.
Right.
Someone ending up in elderly care or a mental health institution. I mean, that truly would be a scandal in Britain.
Does that happen?
Yes, it does happen, and it would be a scandal to see that happening at the second quarter of the 21st century in a country as advanced as the United Kingdom.
And did the lockdown and the pandemic particularly affect, in a negative way, people in these situations? Because I know that those that need residential care, because they've got learning difficulties or so on, suffered particularly from isolation. Was that a problem for this group of people, or not so much?
I think it will have been for some, not so much for others. It's pretty much like any other group in the population. The lockdown was less stressful for some than others. But the generic problems remain, and we will have to deal with them, and it's something that will have to be dealt with across the world, wherever there are populations who are benefiting from real improvements in medical care. And for Britain, if we legislate on this and this becomes law, as I hope it will in early 2022, we'll be the first country in the world to legislate on this. And we talk a lot about global Britain, but it's mostly about trade and military power and diplomacy and so on. It's also got to be about our values. And I think if we pass this into law, then we will be a beacon in the world for others to follow.
So your bill would create a Down Syndrome Act, and that would enshrine certain rights, would it?
It will enshrine instructions from a Secretary of State to local bodies such as health authorities, CCGs, or to education authorities or local authorities, telling them what level of provision is appropriate. And of course that can't be static. That will be determined by a committee that sits and advises the Secretary of State on the changes that are going on all the time around those who have Down syndrome, to make sure that we are flexible as we move forward. There'd be nothing worse than having a piece of legislation that locks today's practices in without allowing us to be flexible in the future.
And presumably the Disability Discrimination Act wasn't enough in this case to protect, to enshrine these protections.
Well, again, you're talking about a definable population here, about 47,000 across the country, people with a very identifiable diagnosis. There's no question about whether you have Down syndrome or not. It's a simple genetic test. With identifiable needs, with identifiable treatments. People with Down syndrome won't fall into just traditional disability groupings, but it will look at care issues, it will look at specific medical treatments and therapies available. And so it's about just saying we're putting a safety net in where health authorities, education authorities and local care authorities are working at the best level. There probably won't be any impact on them. But this is about ensuring that people with Down syndrome get the level of care that I think they have a right to expect in 21st century Britain.
You talked about the misconceptions, which are quite widespread, I think, still about people with Down syndrome, and you've got a lot of young people supporting your campaign, and these are people who have managed to build quite remarkable careers in many cases. It is a spectrum, isn't it? But I think what you're saying is things are changing really quite dramatically for people born with Down syndrome now, and they can look forward to very long and very fulfilled lives.
Very much. And this bill is not about Down syndrome. It's not about a condition. It is about people who have Down syndrome. And the key point is that it's about people. Yes. It's about giving them the opportunity to live with independence, with opportunity and with dignity. And if that's not what our society is about, then I don't know what it is.
You talk about trying to correct some of these misconceptions. Of course, there's still a large number of women will choose to have terminations if they have antenatal tests that suggest that their unborn child may have Down syndrome. Is that beginning to shift at all, and would you like to see an end to that?
I don't know if it is beginning to shift, but one of the things that parents shouldn't have to consider is that their child would have a poor quality of life. This is to ensure that all children born with Down syndrome get a good quality of life in the way that we would expect for other children in our society.
I mean, you wouldn't go so far as to say that it should not be allowed to have a termination.
And I don't wish to get into that issue in this bill. This is about the children who are born in Britain with Down syndrome, that through their life that they get the opportunities and the quality of life that the rest of us take for granted.
Now, normally with private members' bills, there's very little chance of it actually becoming law unless you're lucky enough to come quite high up in the lottery. Just remind our viewers, how does it work and why has yours got a really good chance now of actually becoming legislation?
Well, we all apply for it every year and we pluck 10 out.
And you've been around a long time. And
I've been around 29 years, the first time I've been in the top 10. You go for the opportunities when they come along. Getting cross-party support and finally getting government support means that there's a real chance of getting it into law. And, you know, it's a nice thing that Parliament comes together on this. As I said, I think that MPs are supportive of this because they've seen it for themselves.
Absolutely.
They understand what parents go through, they understand what individuals face as challenges. And I think that, you know, it's nice in this day and age when there's so much talk about, you know, how we conduct our politics, that people have come together on this, and let's just hope we can persuade the House of Lords to do the same.
Absolutely. So just to reiterate then, you have cross-party support on this bill. That means hopefully it should sail through its second reading and then it goes to the Lords. Are there likely to be anybody objecting to this?
Well, I would hope that if we've got cross-party support in the House of Commons and we've got government support and the bill goes through unopposed and it comes out of its committee stage in the Commons intact, that there is no reason for the unelected House to change it in any way.
All right, here's hoping. Thank you very much and good luck with the second reading today.
Thank you.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.